January 5, 1944, somewhere in the snow-covered fields of eastern France, a gray dawn breaks over a temporary American processing camp. Barbed wire hums in the wind, and the frozen ground cracks under the boots of guards starting their morning rounds. Inside the wire, German prisoners stand silently, their faces hollow, wrapped in tattered coats, waiting for whatever the day will bring. Suddenly, a sound cuts through the bitter cold air, a deep, steady clang. It's the sound of the American field kitchen opening, the clang of a ration tin. A sound that, for these men, would come to symbolize everything they never expected. What happened next would confront them with a truth that went far beyond the war, far beyond the gnawing hunger in their stomachs. It would shatter the very foundation of what they'd been taught and force them to see their enemy with entirely new eyes. Because on that morning, the Americans fed them. And they didn't just feed them, they fed them well. To understand why this moment was so profound, we have to go back to the core of German military indoctrination. From their first days of training, soldiers of the Wehrmacht were told that surrendering to the enemy meant certain humiliation, starvation, and cruelty. They were warned that capture by Western forces, especially the Americans, would lead to a slow, miserable end. Nazi propaganda relentlessly painted the United States as a nation of decadence, greed, and barbarism hidden behind a thin veil of democracy. But the reality these German soldiers walked into was not brutality, it was abundance. Captured German diaries from that time reveal a simple but staggering shock. The rations given to them as prisoners were often higher in calories than what many German frontline soldiers had been eating in the final, desperate years of the war. The Geneva Convention demanded humane treatment, and while not all nations upheld it equally, the United States made a remarkable effort to adhere to it, sometimes even exceeding what was required. This created an emotional whiplash that few prisoners of war had ever imagined. They braced themselves for physical punishment. Instead, they were handed steaming bowls of hot soup. They expected to be mocked and ridiculed. Instead, they received bread thick enough to hold its shaped bread that smelled warm, clean, and impossibly comforting. Across camps in France, Belgium, and later in the United States itself, German POWs recorded the same astonished observation. The Americans were feeding their prisoners better than many of their own families were eating back home in Germany. Official reports confirm this. A U.S. War Department outline from 1943 stated clearly that POWs must receive meals equal in nutritional value to American soldiers, no less. This meant meat, vegetables, fruit, and even coffee when it was available. And above all, it meant bread. Bread became the recurring symbol of American democracy in these camps. It wasn't glamorous or luxurious, but it was steady, dependable, and plentiful. It was a daily, tangible reminder of a nation that could afford to show mercy. One former German officer wrote in his journal, "We were prepared for starvation. Instead, we received more than we had eaten for months." It was impossible to reconcile this with what we had been told. Their shock wasn't just physical. It was ideological. The daily clang of that ration tin slowly dismantled a worldview built on fear and a sense of superiority. For some, it began a quiet internal transformation. If the enemy they had been taught to hate was willing to treat them with basic humanity, what else had they been lied to about? For the many German prisoners who were eventually shipped to camps in the United States, this effect was even stronger. In places like Texas, Nebraska, and Kansas, they were given structured meals, from hearty stews to fresh vegetables grown on local farms. Some camps even allowed POWs to work in agricultural fields, where American farmers would sometimes leave small, informal offerings: an apple, an extra slice of bread, not as a calculated strategy, but as a simple, instinctive act of kindness. The war had stripped these men of everything: their certainty, their pride, their sense of direction. Yet here, thousands of miles from home, a simple meal could restore a flicker of dignity. Now, not every camp was perfect, and not every guard was kind. But when compared to the unimaginable brutality on the Eastern Front, or the starvation gripping many German cities, the American treatment stood in stark, undeniable contrast. And the German soldiers felt that difference deeply. Historically, this quiet policy had unexpected, far-reaching consequences. A 1947 study conducted by the Office of the Provost Marshal General found something fascinating. German POWs held by the United States were significantly more likely to develop favorable views of American democracy than those captured by any other Allied nation. The study traced this profound shift not to political lectures or re-education programs, but to their lived experience, specifically, the fairness and generosity they encountered day after day. That simple bread ration became a quiet ambassador for American values. For many of these men, it was the first time they understood that democracy wasn't chaos, or weakness, or moral decay as they had been told. It was structure, abundance, and the core belief that even an enemy deserved basic human dignity. And when the war finally ended, thousands of these POWs carried those impressions home with them. Some would later immigrate to the United States. Others played a crucial role in rebuilding West Germany, armed with a new understanding of the democratic world they had once fought to destroy. They shared their stories not of torture, but of unexpected humanity, not of starvation, but of the clang of a ration tin on a cold morning. That sound stayed with them for the rest of their lives. It was a symbol of a world built on fairness rather than on fear. And in the quiet epilogue of this history, one truth becomes crystal clear. Sometimes the greatest weapon against tyranny isn't a rifle, but a warm meal. It's not brute force, but the simple proof that a freer world can feed both its people and its enemies. In that simple act, serving bread to those who came to destroy you, America demonstrated a different kind of power. A power that outlasts battles, survives borders, and can reshape the beliefs of those who once marched beneath a darker flag. Long after the guns fell silent, what many German prisoners remembered was not the overwhelming might of American armies, but the simple humanity of a nation whose strength was measured not only in steel, but in its capacity for generosity. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please consider subscribing for more history that you might not have learned in school. We'll see you in the next one.